My friends, when we look out at the world in 2025, we see a global stage that is more intricate, more interlinked, and more competitive than ever before. And standing firmly in the middle of that stage, we find two great democracies, the United States of America and the Republic of India. Both proud nations, both diverse nations, both with ambitions as vast as the world itself. Now, some people might be asking why India is asserting itself more strongly with the United States. Why at this moment? Why in this place? The answer isn't rooted in hostility or rivalry for rivalry's sake. It's about maturity. It's about a country that has grown in confidence, in capacity, and in conviction. For decades, India's economic rise has been deliberate and persistent. It has become a hub of creativity, a global provider of technology, pharmaceuticals, and skilled talent. And when a country reaches that stage, when it can nourish its people, educate its youth, and send satellites into orbit, it begins to view itself not as a follower in the global order, but as a shaper of it. There is also a matter of history and geography. India lies at the heart of Asia, surrounded by opportunities as well as challenges that the United States cannot entirely experience from across the seas. That means when India speaks about regional stability, sea lanes, or the frameworks of technology and energy, it speaks with the authority of one who lives in that environment. But let's be clear, standing tall does not mean walking away. It means participating on equal footing. It means saying we respect you, but we will navigate our own path. And in a balanced international community, that is a positive development. It compels all of us, Americans, Indians, and others, to listen with greater patience, to compromise more thoughtfully, and to create solutions that recognize the dignity of all people. Because in the end, the true measure of a partnership isn't whether one side always agrees with the other. It's whether both can disagree and still cooperate towards shared progress. And I believe truly that the United States and India are capable of doing just that. Not simply because of what unites us, but because of the vision we both share for a world that is freer, more prosperous, and more just. India's expanding economic strength and growing independence in 2025 are not sudden occurrences. They are the result of decades of thoughtful planning, social transformation, and resilience in the face of international pressures. To understand why this rise has translated into greater independence from the United States, one must examine how India's economic story unfolded, how its domestic capabilities matured, and how global shifts altered the balance of influence. In the late 20th century, India's economy was largely inward-looking, shielded by heavy tariffs and guided by centralized planning. The reforms of the early 1990s marked a dramatic turning point. By liberalizing its markets, deregulating industries, and opening doors to foreign capital, India set the stage for consistent growth. Over the next 3 decades, the country steadily increased its portion of global GDP, powered by a young population, an expanding services sector, and a significant rise in manufacturing and exports. By the early 2020s, India had firmly joined the ranks of the world's 5 largest economies. This momentum meant India could increasingly finance its own development without depending on foreign loans or aid from institutions often influenced by the United States. In earlier years, financial assistance came with policy conditions aligned with American economic thinking. But by 2025, India had the fiscal stability and foreign exchange reserves to set its own priorities, reducing its vulnerability to outside influence. This shift matters because financial independence translates directly into political autonomy. A nation able to sustain itself economically is far less likely to be swayed by the promise or the withdrawal of external support. A central element of India's resilience has been its diversification of trade and investment partners. Instead of depending heavily on the United States and Western economies, India built extensive connections with Southeast Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. Energy partnerships with Gulf countries, technological collaborations with East Asia, and agricultural exports to African markets have all reduced the risks of leaning too heavily on a single partner. This broad diversification has given India both leverage and security. The digital transformation has been vital to India's independence as well. homegrown technology firms, progress in digital financial systems, and breakthroughs in biotechnology and artificial intelligence have made India a true competitor in areas once dominated by the United States and China. The global recognition of India's Unified Payments Interface, UPI, is one such example. It has become a model for other nations, reducing the hold of foreign payment systems. Likewise, India's advances in renewable energy technologies, particularly in solar production and green hydrogen, have positioned it as a significant player in the transition to cleaner energy sources. Domestic manufacturing has also played an increasingly important role. Campaigns like Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat, which once appeared as ambitious slogans, have evolved into concrete policies strengthening the nation's industrial capacity. From defense equipment to pharmaceuticals, India has expanded production in areas once dependent on imports. This is particularly visible in the pharmaceutical sector, where India is not only self-sufficient in producing essential medicines, but also a major exporter to both developing and advanced nations. Another dimension often overlooked is India's demographic strength. With a median age far younger than that of the United States, Europe, or China, India possesses a labor force that is both vast and dynamic. This youthful workforce fuels domestic consumption while also providing the human capital required for continuous growth. As domestic markets grow stronger, India becomes less dependent on exports to the United States for economic stability. India's rise has also coincided with a broader multipolar shift in the world economy. The post-Cold War era of American economic dominance has given way to a more complex web of interdependence, where countries such as India, Brazil, and Indonesia hold increasing influence. This distribution of power means the United States can no longer unilaterally dictate global trade rules without facing pushback. India's role in alternative trade groupings and multilateral forums such as BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization shows its readiness to operate outside traditional US-led frameworks when it chooses. Yet self-reliance is not merely about producing more domestically. It is about building the institutional strength to make sovereign choices without fear of economic coercion. India has invested deeply in its financial infrastructure. From widening rural banking access to modernizing its stock exchanges, the Reserve Bank of India has created robust mechanisms for managing inflation and currency shifts, providing the country with stability in times of global turbulence. India's approach to foreign capital has also shifted. While still open to American investments, India now places clearer limits to ensure critical sectors remain under domestic control. Restrictions on foreign stakes in sensitive industries, encouragement of joint ventures with Indian partners, and support for domestic startups all reflect a more strategic outlook toward globalization. This is not isolationism, it is calculated integration into the world system on terms favorable to India. By 2025, India's external partnerships show a nation confident in its selectivity. Whether negotiating arms deals, technology transfers, or trade accords, India no longer accepts conditions out of fear of losing investment or market access. Instead, it evaluates each agreement through the lens of national interest and is prepared to walk away from unfavorable terms. That capacity to walk away is one of the most visible markers of true independence. It is also important to acknowledge the cultural side of self-reliance. Economic empowerment has cultivated a stronger sense of national pride and identity. This public confidence influences political choices and government strategy, reinforce the idea that India need not bend to outside dictates, but can carve its own path as a respected sovereign power. Indian citizens, increasingly conscious of their country's strengths, now support leaders who adopt firm stances in international negotiations, even if that brings friction with powerful nations such as the United States. In democracies, public opinion carries weight, and a confident electorate is less likely to tolerate what it perceives as submission to foreign interests. All of these elements, economic diversification, technological advancement, manufacturing growth, demographic vitality, institutional resilience, and cultural pride, come together to form the base of an independent foreign policy. When a nation possesses the resources and resilience to withstand global shocks, It can place long-term strategy above short-term compromises. And that is precisely where India stands in 2025, a nation prepared to defend its own vision of the future, even when that vision diverges from Washington's. Strategic differences between India and the United States in 2025 arise from a mixture of geography, history, and shifting national priorities. Both countries are democracies cherishing values like pluralism and rule of law. Yet their strategic environments shape perspectives that do not always match. These divergences are neither accidental nor unprecedented. They represent the natural outcomes of two sovereign powers carving their place in a multipolar, complex world. India's geographic position informs much of its strategic mindset. Located in South Asia, with China to the north, Pakistan to the west, and maritime concerns stretching across the Indian Ocean, India's security priorities are inherently distinct from those of the United States. America's focus has historically spanned the Atlantic and Pacific. For India, however, stability in its immediate region is paramount. Border tensions, cross-border terrorism, and local disputes directly shape military planning and alliance choices. This focus on immediate neighborhood challenges often means India will not automatically align with U.S. strategic objectives, which are global in scope. A striking example lies in India's relationship with China. For the United States, China is the foremost competitor across military, economic, and technological dimensions. For India, the relationship is far more layered, defined by mistrust and rivalry, but also substantial trade interdependence. Even during tense moments, such as the standoff in Ladakh, bilateral trade volumes remain significant. The US, by contrast, has leaned toward economic decoupling from China in sensitive sectors. For India, a complete severing of ties would come at a steep economic cost and could unsettle the wider region. A risk New Delhi prefers to avoid unless absolutely necessary. This difference underlines India's pragmatic approach, maintaining vigilance against Chinese aggression, while also recognizing economic realities that cannot be ignored. India's defense strategy reflects these distinctions as well. The United States projects power on a global scale, maintaining military installations across continents. India has instead adhered to a doctrine of strategic restraint, focusing primarily on securing its borders and ensuring dominance within the Indian Ocean. While it has deepened defense cooperation with Washington through joint exercises, arms deals, and intelligence sharing, New Delhi has resisted binding commitments that might resemble a formal alliance. This reluctance stems from India's legacy of non-alignment, a principle adapted over decades but still relevant. It underscores India's intent to preserve autonomy in critical military decisions. Another difference is visible in the diplomatic arena. Washington, though active in global institutions, often gravitates toward coalitions where it sets the pace. India, however, places greater weight on a multipolar framework where no single state dominates. This philosophy explains India's active role in groupings like reshaped, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the G20, even while engaging closely with Western powers. From India's vantage point, balancing multiple centers of power better protects its sovereignty and equips it to maneuver amid changing alliances. Energy policy further highlights this divergence. The United States, aiming to limit adversarial states, has enforced sanctions on nations such as Iran and Russia. India, however, has not fully conformed when compliance undermines its own energy needs. In 2025, India continues to import discounted Russian oil, justifying it as necessary for affordability and domestic growth. Washington perceives such transactions as weakening its sanctions regime, while India insists they represent sovereign decisions rooted in development priorities. This clash illustrates a fundamental difference. One country enforcing global norms versus another prioritizing regional security and economic survival. Technology policy marks another divergence. The US has pushed strict controls on emerging sectors such as semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and 5G networks, largely framed around containing Chinese dominance. India agrees on safeguarding technology but places equal emphasis on accessibility and affordability for its vast population. As a result, India diversifies partnerships across multiple countries and invests heavily in local innovation ecosystems that reduce reliance on any single external source. In some cases, India has declined to fully endorse US restrictions, instead choosing case-by-case evaluations of potential partners. Differences also extend to global governance reforms. India has long pushed for structural adjustments in institutions like the United Nations Security Council (IMF) and World Bank so they better reflect modern realities. The United States has expressed support in principle, but has been hesitant to endorse reforms that might dilute its influence. For India, these reforms are not abstract ideals but urgent steps to ensure decision-making mirrors the voices of emerging economies. Washington's slow pace on such changes has caused quiet frustration in New Delhi. Domestic politics in both nations further shape these dynamics. In the United States, policies toward India must account for multiple domestic groups concerned about trade balances, human rights, or competition with China. In India, meanwhile, leaders answer to a public increasingly committed to strategic autonomy and resistant to the idea of being seen as subordinate. This popular sentiment compels leaders to take firm stances, even if that occasionally complicates cooperation with Washington. The two also diverge in how they approach regional conflicts. The United States has at times intervened militarily or economically in distant regions to enforce norms. India, however, intervenes selectively, only when its direct interests are implicated. This approach is pragmatic rather than isolationist. It reflects resource limits and the necessity of focusing on immediate threats over faraway crises. Despite these differences, they do not automatically weaken the partnership. Divergences are natural for two large powers with unique histories and geographies. The real question is how such differences are managed. In 2025, India's willingness to diverge from American positions shows confidence in its capabilities and underscores that alignment should be guided by shared interests, not obligation. For Washington, these differences serve as a reminder that 21st century partnerships must be adaptable and rooted in respect for each other's priorities. Ultimately, the divergence in strategic approaches is not evidence of a broken relationship, but of a mature one. Both nations can cooperate in areas of convergence: counterterrorism, climate action, maritime safety, while preserving space for disagreement elsewhere. This sometimes uneasy dynamic may actually ensure that the partnership is more balanced and thus more sustainable. It rests not on dependency but on equality. Over the long term, this foundation may prove stronger than alliances bound only by temporary alignment. The shifting balance of power in 2025 is a central factor behind India's evolving posture toward the United States. For much of the post-Cold War era, Washington held near unquestioned primacy in global politics, economics, and defense.